You need answered. How safe is your job? How safe are our banks? How will it affect your super? How will it affect property? Tonight, it's all about minding your money.
The Friday freefall, the second worst trading day ever.
Do you think this is a crash?
Yeah, I guess we have to call it that.
Australia's central bank stunned the markets today.
The Reserve Bank cutting rates a full 1%.
The time to act is now.
We're in an urgent situation.
It's going to be pretty rough sailing for a while to come.
Hi, 3 weeks ago, I was on Wall Street at the heart of the global financial meltdown. Since then, governments around the world have spent trillions of dollars to prop up banks and the financial system. But it hasn't worked. The world desperately needs some leadership because, to be brutal, certainly not getting any from lame duck US President George Bush. What's happening now is serious. It will change the way we live for the next 10 years. We begin with breaking news. The Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, with an address to the nation.
Good evening. The global financial crisis is affecting financial markets right around the world, including Australia. More than 25 banks around the world have failed or have been bailed out. Share markets around the world have suffered large losses. And the reality is, in recent days, we have entered a new and damaging stage in the global financial crisis, with real impacts on economic growth and jobs around the world, and with real impacts on economic growth and jobs here in Australia as well. Australia is better placed than almost any other country in the world to deal with this crisis. We have the best bank regulators in the world. Our banks' balance sheets are strong and healthy. And Australia, unlike most other countries, has a strong budget surplus. Part of the reason we are in a better position than most is that all year we've been anticipating events and taking practical steps to prepare for them. And that's why I've announced new measures today to continue to maintain the stability of the Australian financial system into the future. This package includes a guarantee for all bank deposits in Australian banks, credit unions and building societies. The government has been working for the last several months on the details of its financial claims scheme for depositors, because depositors haven't had one before. We've decided to bring in this scheme to cover all depositors and all deposits without cap, because I don't want to see unnecessary anxiety out there in the Australian community as ordinary Australians watch the bad news unfold on their television screens from overseas each night. I also want to put our banking arrangements on the same footing as those which now apply in many other countries. Another measure I've announced today is for the government to guarantee the overseas borrowing arrangements of our banks so that they can secure long-term credit to continue to fund business and mortgage lending in Australia into the future. Other governments have done this with their banks, and with banks that in many cases have very poor credit ratings indeed relative to Australian banks. And I don't want to put our banks at a disadvantage for the future. All this is necessary to help unclog the arteries of the global financial system. The government is also concerned about the impact of the global financial crisis on growth and jobs for Australia. The government's determined to support the economy into the future by bringing forward our $76 billion nation-building agenda, where for the first time the Commonwealth will fund large-scale investment in our ports, our roads and our rail, and in our high-speed broadband infrastructure for the future. The government also remains determined to take other decisive action as necessary to support continued positive economic growth into the future, and to help working families, pensioners and carers deal with the impacts. This is not just about the national economy, it's just as much about the household economy. The truth is that what Australia is experiencing is the economic equivalent of a rolling national security crisis. That means there is going to be a lot of rough weather ahead, and I just want to level with you. But the government has set an economic course for the country to see Australia through. And we remain prepared to take whatever action may be necessary to secure this nation's long-term economic future. Good evening.
The PM there addressing the nation. In a nutshell, he's guaranteed all your deposits in banks, building societies and credit unions. He's going to make sure our banks can borrow overseas so they can keep lending to us. And he's going to spend up big on infrastructure to keep creating jobs. They're good steps. Well, this weekend, leaders of the richest 20 countries have been in an emergency meeting to come up with a plan to stabilise the global financial system. CNN's Richard Quest joins me from London. Richard, good evening to you. Now, these leaders of the G20, have they come up with anything? Everyone's so scared of their savings in banks.
I think in most countries now, most governments have now pretty much told all individual depositors, don't worry, your money's safe. But at this point, Koshi, we're not really worried about individual savers. It's the health of the whole system that people are really concerned about. The head of the IMF, Dominic Strauss-Kahn, said just a short while ago, he said that the world has been brought to the brink of systemic collapse. Now, when you hear those sort of words, systemic collapse, that is why Kevin Rudd has just announced such measures as guaranteeing deposits, increased liquidity, vast fiscal stimulus, because, Koshi, we have moved into a new area and a new era in the financial markets.
Okay,
it's one of worry, it's one of despair.
What about these other leaders, though? Have they come up with anything over the weekend to try and stop the panic of last week?
You have very cleverly spotted the fact that I avoided the question, because the truth is they've come up with a 5-point plan and there's no detail about it. For nearly 12 months, these men have been, and women have been talking but not acting. And now, all of a sudden, hallelujah, they seem to have realised, as your Prime Minister said, this is a case of a rolling national security crisis. And now, only now, 12 months after people like you and I have been banging on about this, are we having G7s, G20s, IMFs and addresses to the nations.
OK, so just quickly, will this settle markets down next week?
Volatility is going to be the word of the next few weeks. Nobody who hasn't got the strongest stomach should be anywhere near the equity markets for the foreseeable future. And I mean strong, Koshi, strong.
OK, Richard, we'll check back with you a little later in the program. Speaking of the share market, our share market has been absolutely smashed, down 16% last week, 8% on Friday alone. It was absolute carnage. And remember, your superannuation nest egg is invested in shares, so every working Australian was hit. Chris Reason has a look now at an extraordinary week and the damage it's done to your retirement dream.
There are now no two ways about it. We're all not just witness to history, many of us will be victims of it too.
Today was panic, this week was panic.
Certainly greater than the 1990s recession, hopefully not as bad as the Great Depression.